Hi, welcome to English. My name is Mrs. Neal and I'm Head of English. Our big question for today, and what we're looking at, is what do we learn about a character? Now, when we're looking into what we learn about a character, ultimately we're looking at what's called writer's characterisation. And when we talk about characterisation, that's the distinctive natures or features of someone. Ultimately, their personality traits. Now, how we're going to go about doing that today is really focusing on the language that a writer uses when they're characterising someone. And what we're going to be doing is a thinking hard task. And when we talk about thinking hard, it's looking at different ways to approach a particular task. And what I want you to do today is to get creative. I'm going to read to you a passage from a well-known novel, really describing a quite famous character. What you're going to do, as you listen to my reading of this character, is you're going to transform the language into a series of images that come to mind when you hear about this character. Leave a space, if you can, between each image, so that when the second time of reading, or you going back over this particular part of it, that you're able to add in any images that you feel you missed out on the first time of listening. So with your pencil ready, you need to be listening. You might want to close your eyes as you're hearing this and visualise and record any images that come to mind, because what you're ultimately trying to do is build up a sense of what and who this character is like. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret, self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shrivelled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows, and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. So you're going to have a look at those images and think to yourself, right, when you hear it again, what images do you think you might have missed? We're trying to gather them chronologically as we go. So listening again and filling in those gaps. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck fire. Secret, self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shrivelled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. Okay, so now we've done the reading and you've gathered all your images together, we're going to be using these images to really work towards informing you, answering that ultimate big question of what do we learn about the character. So what I want you to do, I'm going to give you 1 minute. In that 1 minute, you're going to look at your series of images that you've collated from listening and visualising this character that's been given to you. And you're going to start to think, right, well, how would I answer that question? What have I learned about this character from my images? So you have 1 minute independently to start to formulate your ideas. Okay, so now you've had that minute to think independently, I want you to pair up, I want you to find one other member of your family who's been doing this lesson along with you and compare. Explain to each other why you chose the images that you had and what have each of you individually learned about this character. Are there any similarities or differences in the way that you've interpreted them? What do you find interesting perhaps about what someone else has interpreted that maybe you haven't thought about? So I'm going to give you 1 minute to pair up with someone else from your family. Okay, so now you've gathered these ideas between the two of you. I want you now, as a whole class feedback session, I want you to feed back to the rest of your family that may not have taken part in this lesson. What can you teach them? What have you learned about this character and how did you learn that? How did those images help to inform your understanding? Off you go.